Here I am live again, and my computer is still behaving in wacky ways, but it's only the Chrome browser, so I don't know what's going on with it. Anyway, really doesn't matter. Well, we're coming up to the weekend. This is Friday. For a lot of people, it is the end of their work week. For other people, it's not the end of their work week. And I'm one of those people for whom it is not the end of the work week, because really and truly, if you're in ministry, you don't have a work week, you have a week, and it's all work. So maybe it is a work week, but it's not 5 days, it's not 7 days, it's whatever it takes. But that's beside the point. Sometimes Reverend Jesse can be just as obscure as the person he's attempting to explain, which is Ernest Holmes, and sometimes not. Here we go. Anyway, the first quote is from Anais Nin, and she was a French-born American, and I'm reading here, French-born American diarist, essayist, novelist, and writer of short stories and erotica. So there you are. She's born to Cuban parents in France, and she was the daughter of a composer, Joachim Nin, and the classically trained singer, Rosa Coldmouth. So there you are then. That's Anais Nin. So what did she have to say? She said, throw your dreams into space like a kite, and you do not know what it will bring back. Well, I guess that's fair enough. And the title of the whole thing is Another and a Better. First quote is from a book called Can We Talk to God? It's actually a pretty good one. It's not too long. It's a fairly short book. And it's actually taken from some lectures that Ernest Holmes gave called the Ebel Lectures. Ernest Holmes and others in his time used to go to different places. They would have these huge audiences and they would give these lectures. And as I said, they would attract literally thousands of people. And some of these would be quite famous people. A lot of them were just like you and I, run-of-the-mill people, but a lot of them were actually famous people as well. So Can We Talk to God is actually taken from one of these lecture series called the Ebel Lectures, and I believe it's the name of a place. I think it's the Ebel Theatre. And if I screwed up the pronunciation, forgive me, I'm a Brit, and I still pronounce a lot of things the British way. Some things not, some things I do. Ernest Holmes in this series of lectures, and this part says, in each other, through each other, we contact God. But God is more than this. If this were the only God there is, then the artist would have created a picture and stepped into it, being completely lost in their own words. Now do we say that art is greater than the artist, or thought greater than the mind which conceived it? The poem is not the poet. The poet has breathed into it, animated it, and created it, and it will stay so long as their consciousness exists. But they have not stepped into it. Someday they will write another and a better. Neither is God absorbed by law or creation. So God is all there is. God is in and through everything, and God is outside of everything. So everything exists within this thing that we call God, the ground of all being, spirit, the all, whatever you want to call it. Some people say universe. I don't. Why? Because I don't think the word universe covers it all. It's the universe. And is it infinite? I don't think so. It's huge. It's expanding. But it started off from one thing, the Big Bang, so it can't be infinite because it just keeps expanding. But the mind that brought it all into existence is above and beyond all that. So it is infinite. The universe is probably just one of many universes. I don't know. Nobody knows. We can only speculate. Maybe someday they will know, and then someday we will know. This is Reverend Dr. Jesse Jennings explaining what Ernest Holmes has just been talking about. He says, here Ernest Holmes alludes to a passage in his What I Believe manifesto, later to become our Declaration of Principles. And that's actually in the Science of Mind magazine every single month towards the beginning. And in this, he states that the divine is not absorbed by or within its creation. Many ask, why is this true? And what difference does it make anyway? He says, it's important to realize that there is no final anything. The poet, having crafted in brilliance, continues to work. If the poet stops writing for any reason, the art of poetry itself rolls on. No matter whose name we float as being the greatest ever in their chosen occupation, the occupation eclipses each personal contribution. For any aspiring artist and inventor, this then means the field remains wide open to whatever comes next. If the work fits no known genre, another will emerge. Divine wisdom is everywhere present and responsive, delighting in its own creation through us. A few examples of that would be like hip-hop. Didn't exist as a genre until relatively recently. AI, artificial intelligence, did not exist as a separate way of looking at things until fairly recently. In fact, we used to call it machine learning at one time. So in other words, how we look at life continues to evolve. But what he's talking about here, he says, I know I'd call it another and a better. There's another and a better way of looking at things, I guess. I'm trying to think what I get out of this. The affirmation actually probably says it all. It says, I express joy and gratitude to this inner presence, my creator in my heaven. You know, I was listening to the radio earlier today. I usually listen to PBS because it's got some decent stuff on there. It's relatively not aligned to anything. It is left, if anything, but it's not. But it also puts forward right-wing views as well. So it's kind of the nearest thing we've got in this country to something being relatively neutral. And it will publish stuff no matter who said it. Well, there are better examples out there, probably, but it's a fairly neutral place, actually. They were talking today about Shakespeare. They were actually quoting Shakespeare, and they were saying that in some of Shakespeare's passages, even Shakespeare would admit that there were multitudes of meanings, even within one sentence, and they were discussing how the artists were expressing this. And probably there's as many ways of expressing Shakespeare as there are artists. And oftentimes there's lots and lots and lots of ways of interpreting the same language. And the truth is, unless Shakespeare actually wrote down and said, this is what I mean by this particular soliloquy, you know, a one-person speech, or this particular sentence or this particular phrase, once he actually wrote down and said what he meant about it, we don't know. But I do know this, that it's hard to interpret Shakespeare sometimes, and that's why, at least when I was at school, the books that we read, Hamlet, Merchant of Venice, whatever it was, would all have marginal notes explaining what Shakespeare meant by a certain thing. But the real truth is that unless the artist actually, or the writer in this case, says exactly what they mean, it's all subject to interpretation. And it's the same thing with Ernest Holmes and Reverend Dr. Jesse Jennings. With Reverend Dr. Jesse Jennings, we have an advantage. Why? Because we can ask him, what did you mean by this? With Ernest Holmes and Shakespeare, we can't because they're gone. So unless they actually explain what they meant by something, we don't know. So the whole point I'm making is this, that anything anybody says is open to interpretation. And each of us looks at life through a different filter. We all see life through a different lens, and therefore we make different interpretations. That's why when somebody on this side supports one political candidate and somebody supports that one, this person often doesn't see what this one's saying, and this one often doesn't see what this one's saying, because they're looking at it from their own lens. And even when they're hearing the same words, they're filtering it differently. But the whole point of this to me is the fact that there is one stable source of everything out there which brought everything into existence, and that we have access to it at all times. We just have to do our spiritual work, and that's the only constant in everything. You know, about the universe, we're still discovering different ways. Subatomic particles weren't discovered until relatively recently. It's not all that long ago that some people in the world thought the world was flat. Probably not as many as we think, because one of the ancient Greeks living in Egypt a couple of thousand years ago figured out the radius of the Earth. So obviously, to figure it out, you've got to know that it's wrong. People going to find the East, like Columbus and so on, you know, as you know, when he landed in the Americas, he actually thought he was in the Far East. And that's why people are called Indians, because they thought they got to the Far East. They certainly didn't believe the world was flat. So whatever it is that's bothering us in life, we've always got a source that we can turn to that's constant. Is it changing? Yes, it's changing because we change and we're all parts of it. But it's constant in the sense that we can always rely on it for guidance. So the whole point to me of this is do your spiritual work. And I express joy and gratitude to this inner presence, my creator in my heaven. In other words, my own personal experience of that which brought everything into existence. Is that a suitable explanation? I don't know, but it's mine. I hope it helped. If it hindered, let me know. If it helps, let me know. The one thing I do like is feedback. You know, when we do classes and I send out videos by different means, Dropbox or whatever, sometimes people don't get them, or they get the email but they can't access it, and then it's up to me to try and figure out why. Because we all look at things differently, and technology is no different. I express joy and gratitude to this inner presence, my creator in my heaven. So, in my own way of looking at things, do your spiritual work. And when you do your spiritual work, you will never, ever be alone. It's impossible, because you will recognize the one source that you came from, that everything came from, and you will know that that one source, that presence, always has your back. Reverend Lisa will have your back in a different way. She will be talking to you about self-care, probably, even though she's reading from the Science of Mind textbook. She'll be on tomorrow morning about 9 o'clock. I'll be back tomorrow evening around about 5, and I hope we have a more straightforward thing to talk about tomorrow. So until then, namaste.